This is a true story, and telling it still makes my hands shake. I was 22 when it happened, and if I close my eyes, I can still smell the lilies in the church and feel the pew biting into the backs of my knees. At my mother's funeral, my boyfriend's phone lit up on the hymn book between us with a text that read, "Suite 827, see you in 10." And my uncle leaned into my shoulder, breath hot with bourbon, and whispered, "Try not to make a scene." The screen glare cut through the stained glass light, his cracked iPhone like a little lighthouse announcing wreckage. The choir's amen trembled through the nave, while Chase, my boyfriend, tilted the hymn book to hide the message, his thumb jabbing at the side button as if he could bury it under the velvet of the funeral program. I could hear the heating vents sigh and the deliberate clicks of heels toward the vestibule, people already lining up to carry my mother's casket, and I tasted metal beneath my tongue. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I was the girl holding her mother's rosary and her breath, caught between the two men who had perfected the art of telling me to be smaller. The text hovered behind my eyes as we stood. My Uncle Rick angled his body to block me from the aisle, as if containing me was a courtesy. He had the same high-boned cheeks as my mother, the same near-black hair that showed gray only at the temples, but none of her gentleness. Mom used to call him charming in groups, cruel in corners. I heard the priest say, "My mother's name, Elena Morales," and it landed like a bell that never stopped ringing. We filed down the aisle. The program in my hand had a picture of my mom smiling on the lakefront trail a year before, wind blowing hard enough to make her hair a flag. She'd spent 20 years building Bright Nest, a small cleaning company that kept North Shore offices and condo lobbies gleaming. She built it by waking up at 4 and filling a thermos and driving a dented van with a box of contractors' trash bags rattling in the back. I'd grown up on job sites and in school libraries, the smell of simple green braided with the smell of old paper. She taught me to track invoices in QuickBooks before I knew what prom felt like, and then cancer hit, and a winter later we were choosing caskets. Outside St. Jerome's, in Rogers Park, the wind off the lake slapped my hair into my face. People dipped their heads and said, "So sorry for your loss," and slid past me to their cars. Like grief was a receipt they needed me to sign so they could leave. Chase kept his hand on the brace of my back, where my coat met my dress, and his other hand hovered over his pocket like he was guarding something holy. His phone. We had been together a year and change. He was a senior at Northwestern, a slick double major in econ and communications who always knew where the camera was at parties. He wore the badge of Sigma Chi Vice President like a name brand and had just locked an internship with Harrier Capital down in River North. People used words like promising about Chase and words like resilient about me, and I tried not to hear what that implied. At the cemetery, I carried the rosary and a laminated photo in my coat pocket, the beads and the slick paper making little clicks that sounded like a countdown. The text, Suite 827, see you in 10. Who was in 827? Which hotel? Evanston doesn't have many suite-style hotels. I tried to shove my thoughts away from that cliff and focus on the exactness of the ritual, the way the pallbearers gripped the straps, the way the polished mahogany took our reflections and liquefied them. My Uncle Rick's hand landed heavy on my shoulder as I lowered a white rose into the grave. "You're brave," he murmured, and I could feel the incoming but like weather. "But we gotta be practical now. There's paperwork, leases to end, clients to notify. Bright Nest can't run on tears." I stepped away, the heels I'd borrowed from my roommate Tasha sinking into thawing ground. "I know how to handle invoices, Rick." He smiled without warmth. "We'll talk tonight. Don't sign anything without me." At the luncheon, back in a rented room at a Mexican restaurant on Clark Street, the ache behind my eyes went from flood to fever. The table was a patchwork of casseroles neighbors had made and pozole the restaurant warmed for us. People's voices ebbed and swelled, laughter threading through them, because that's what people do when they can't stand to be sad any longer. They build little rafts of jokes. Chase kept disappearing. He'd squeeze my shoulder, press a kiss to my temple, then vanish toward the bathrooms or the sidewalk. His phone kept buzzing in his jacket, draped over the back of the chair. The sound muffled by wool, but constant enough to make my skin vibrate. Tasha slid into the chair beside me and squeezed my knee under the table. She was a first year at Northwestern Law, brilliant and tireless, the kind of friend who shows up with a box of Kleenex and a to-do list. "I'll help you with probate stuff," she whispered. "There's a student legal clinic. You don't have to let him—" A flick of her chin toward Rick. "Steamroll you." "I saw a text," I whispered back, her eyebrows skewed. "Whose?" "Chase's. At the church. Suite 827. 10 minutes. My voice was flat, like a paper cut. Small and stinging. Tasha's mouth tightened. "You want me to grab his phone while he's outside pretending he's not on a call?" The sound in my head was a click, everything arranging itself into a grid. "Not here." "Okay, later." She adjusted the hem of my black dress, a caring habit she had, like tucking a child into bed. "You want to leave?" I nodded. On the way out, Uncle Rick intercepted me, catching me by both elbows as if we were about to waltz. "You'll come by the house tonight?" he said, not asked. "Papers to sign. Elena wanted me to be co-executor. I'll manage the winding down. You can focus on classes." "Bright Nest isn't winding down," I said, the sentence falling out before I decided to speak it. She left it to me. He laughed softly, the way you laugh when a toddler says she's going to drive to Target. "Sweetheart, you don't know what you don't know. It'll be cleaner this way. I already told clients we're pausing contracts. Liability, you know, and I'd hate to see you get sued." "Why would you tell clients that without asking me?" The room felt suddenly smaller, the fluorescent lights pressed at our foreheads. "It's what Elena would have wanted." That sentence, coded in the dead, was his favorite weapon. He leaned closer. "We'll talk at 7. Don't be late." He let me go before I could respond. In the Uber back to my apartment off Foster, the city blurred into a lattice of light. Tasha sat beside me, her hand in mine. Chase sent a text, "Running to drop something for a friend. Be at your place by 8. I stared at the words until they fuzzed. A friend, Suite 827. 10 minutes? When we got to my place, I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the window's reflection of me. Lipstick worn down to a stubborn pink line, mascara smudged like I'd tried to charcoal. A different face. I could feel the grief like a weight vest, but beneath it was a flinty thing that had my mother's posture. My phone buzzed. A Venmo notification that Chase had sent someone $163.42 with the coffee cup emoji. The timestamp said 3:07 p.m. He'd been gone from the luncheon 25 minutes then. Tasha peered at my screen. "Coffee cup my ass," she muttered. "Who's the someone?" The username was INH London. London. There are a dozen Londons in Chicago because we all pretend we're other places. But there's also London House, the hotel on Michigan Avenue with the cupola and the rooftop where everyone posts their engagement photos. NH? Initials? I opened Venmo and drilled into the public feeds the way a dentist goes after a stubborn molar. Chase's was set to friends only, of course, but the recipient's profile picture showed a woman's hand holding a flute of champagne, a gold ring on her middle finger, and a tan line on her ring finger like a secret. NH. Her name field read, Natalie Hart. "Harrier Capital has a Natalie," Tasha said, flipping through her phone with the speed of a magician. "Remember? The tall redhead at the fall networking thing at the Alice told you she loved your earrings. She's in their analyst program." I pictured a flash of copper hair, a blazer that meant business, and a laugh that skated over questions without breaking stride. My stomach went cold. I pulled up Chase's location on Find My, the subtle abuse of trust we all pretend is normal. He had turned off location sharing earlier that afternoon. He'd never turned it off with me before. Tasha put water on for tea with a clatter that betrayed her calm. We get evidence. That's what we do. I thought of my mother, of how she managed to make a bed so tight you could bounce a quarter on it and also give me the spotty glow of miracles. She would have told me to sit down and eat. She would have told me not to call someone a thief until you'd counted the drawers. At 8, Chase arrived with the smell of cold air on his coat and a frozen look like someone had stopped his face mid-performance. He folded me into his arms and said, "How are you?" in a voice so tender it could have been a lullaby. He was careful to keep his right wrist turned inward, so the leather bracelet didn't catch the light. It was the one I'd given him on our 6th month, engraved inside with my mom's phrase to me, North Star. I pulled back. "Who's in suite 827? A muscle in his jaw hopped. "A friend from out of town. She needed—" He stalled, backspace light flashing in his eyes. Her flight got delayed, and I said I'd drop her a charger at London House. "Ava, today has been, can we not do this today?" You sent her $163 and a coffee cup emoji at 3:07. London House has a Starbucks on the mezzanine, but that's a lot of coffee. My words felt like someone else had loaded them into my mouth. "It was room service," he said, choosing wrong, for her and her colleague. She had a presentation. "Turn on your location sharing." He blinked. "Now?" "Now." His eyes moved to Tasha, her calm, relentless face. He swallowed and pulled out his phone. "Thumbs busy. There." The dot opened in my maps. My apartment glowed. He said, "Ava," gently. He reached for me. "You left my mother's funeral to take a charger to a woman in a hotel suite who you then bought room service for." "I didn't sleep with her," he said too fast. "God, do you think I'm that soulless? On today? I'm not a monster." Tasha stepped a little between us because she knows my temper, like a dog straining against a leash at the sight of a skateboard. "You need to leave," she said evenly. "Are you serious?" His eyes went shiny. "I'm here trying to support my girlfriend." My laugh came out unhinged, like the hinge had been made of sugar. "You're trying to support yourself." He looked at the bracelet on his wrist and touched it like a rosary. "Ava, I made a mistake, okay? I panicked. I'm bad with boundaries. Natalie's a friend. The coffee rig at the hotel was broken. This is spiraling. Can we talk tomorrow?" "You can pick up your things tomorrow," I said. The words were pebbles I placed in a line across a river. "Not tonight." He looked like he wanted to push past, then looked at Tasha and changed his mind. People like Chase do the math on a room before they decide who they are in it. He left his jacket hanging, as if the act of leaving it made it more likely I'd call him back. When the door closed, I admitted, out loud, for the first time, "He's cheating on me." Tasha hugged me hard, then let go to look in my eyes. Then we make a plan. The plan unfurled over the next days like a tape measure. The thing about grief is that it slows time. The thing about betrayal is that it splits it into razor-thin sections. I could feel Mom in the space between minutes. I could hear her say, "Don't lose your head, Mika. Keep your receipts." I had receipts. Chase was sloppy. On Tuesday, I went to Brightnest's tiny office over a dentist on Devon, the place that still smelled like my childhood. Toner and lemon oil and coffee left on warmer until it tasted like mourned decisions. I opened my mom's office closet and found the inventory of her life. Binders labeled vendors and clients and bank, a shoebox of receipts where she captured cash payments from clients who tipped on holidays. The cracked silver MacBook she'd used in the months she was too tired to sit at the desk. I put the laptop in my backpack. My mother's handwriting on a Post-it still stuck to the palm rest. Be brave, not hard. Tasha met me there with bagels and a legal pad, and that calm that made everything real. I talked to the probate clinic, she said. We can petition to have Rick's co-executor status limited if we can show he's acting against the estate's interest. He can't unilaterally pause contracts. And I talked to Miss Sandoval. She meant Maribel Sandoval, my mother's friend and Bright Nest bookkeeper. She'll help us pull a statement of accounts. Rick told clients we were pausing. I pulled up an email on my phone from a property manager on Sheridan. So sorry to hear about your mom. Rick said to hold off. Let me know if we should schedule a final walkthrough. The email's date. The morning after the funeral. Tasha's mouth went thin. We'll use it. I turned on my mother's MacBook, heart slamming the way it does when you open a door you're not sure you should open. The desktop loaded slowly, like the machine was dragging its memories with it. There were folders labeled Bids 2023 and Taxes, and one, a newer blue folder, labeled Alina Ava. I clicked. Inside were documents named Power of Attorney and Bright Nest Succession Plan.pdf and Lessons for Ava.txt. My mouth went salt. I opened the last one. It wasn't dramatic. It was bullet points in my mother's careful schoolteacher hand. 1. The van needs a new serpentine belt. 2. Pay Maria Lopez 3 more. Appreciate HR. She's worth it. 3. Don't let Rick charm you into bad deals. 4. If you keep it, please keep it. Add online scheduling. 5. Whoever carries the keys must be the most trustworthy person. I laughed and cried at the same time in the way grief makes you two people at once. I'm keeping it, I said to the dusty air. I'm keeping it, Mom. We filed the initial probate petition with the clinic's help that afternoon. A stack of paper so fat it could prop a window open. Tasha drafted a cease-desist style letter for Rick. Not that he would cease or desist, but it felt good to have a document. I texted him to meet me at Bright Nest at 6. He sent back a thumbs up. Before that meeting, though, I needed to look my other problem in the eye. Chase had sent a flurry of messages. I love you. I'm sorry if it seemed sketchy. I'm an idiot. Please don't shut me out. And then a final one after midnight. Can I come up? He didn't come because I didn't respond. But in the morning, I woke to an Instagram story from an account called Natalie Hart Says. It was a boomerang of 2 champagne flutes, clinking with the caption, Startups and Stories Night got me like... And you could see, reflected in the curve of the glass, the London House cupola lights. Her hand wore my bracelet. No, not mine. The bracelet I gave Chase. His hand wore it all summer, the brown leather going buttery with his skin oils. But in the boomerang's loop, as she tilted her wrist, a piece of leather with a silver glint flashed. It could have been coincidence, but that's what liars feed on. Coincidence. I paused the boomerang and took a screenshot. Zoomed. There was the tiny nick in the silver from when Chase caught the bracelet on a belt buckle in Door County. My chest went hot, then cold, then hot again. I sent the screenshot to Tasha. She wrote back, okay, this is becoming math. By 6, Rick had already let himself into Bright Nest with the key he shouldn't have had, but did because family is a lockpicker. He sat behind my mother's desk like he'd been cast as boss in a community theater production. He had on a watch I knew cost more than my car and a sweater with a quarter zip like a politician in a campaign ad. Good to see you, kiddo. He didn't stand. I didn't sit. You don't contact clients without my say, I said. My voice surprised me by how clear it sounded. He smiled in a slow, patient way that meant he thought he was playing the long game. Sweetheart, I love you. I loved your mom. I'm trying to save you from drowning. You're what, 22? You've got Northwestern classes. Do you really want to be up at 4 to scrub baseboards because some dentist on Devon is particular about dust bunnies? I've been up at 4, I said, most of my life. And we don't scrub baseboards with a toothbrush. We use a sock on a painter's pole because Mom figured out it was faster. I put Tasha's letter on the desk. You're not co-executor until the court says you are, and there's a succession plan. This is my company. He flipped through the packet without really reading. "This is adorable." "You illegally represented yourself to clients as the person in charge," Tasha said from the doorway, stepping in on the less than subtle cue I'd texted her to come now. She held up her phone recording because Tasha believes in having the receipts. "We filed a petition this afternoon. You're going to back off?" He laughed. "Your little friend is a law student. Cute. Real cute." "Do you know how many deals I've put together while she was memorizing Latin?" "Enough to know your margins are sloppy," Maribel said, stepping in behind Tasha. She plunked a folder on the desk with a satisfying thump. "And your consulting fees to Armour Investments were taken out before payroll 4 times last year without Elena's authorization. That's embezzlement light, Rick. Also sloppy." The look on Rick's face, his surprise that we'd come prepared, was better than sugar. For a second, the mask slipped and his eyes narrowed, transactional math sprinting across them. "You ladies done?" "We're done when you return the keys and stop contacting clients," I said. My hands were shaking, but they were steady enough to reach into my tote and put the spare key set my mom used to keep in a mason jar out of his reach, as symbolic as it was practical. "We'll see you in court next week." He watched me with an expression I recognized, the calculation you use when the pawn you were going to shove turns out to be a rook. He stood, adjusted his watch. He placed a key on the desk. "You should have asked for my help," he said. "You'll find out how cold it gets when you stand alone." I picked up the key, the metal notched by years of doors. "I'm not alone." He held my gaze for a beat, then lifted his coat from the back of my mother's chair. 7 p.m. then. Good talk." After he was gone, I slumped into the chair and let tears slide hot and unstoppable. Tasha put her hand on my shoulder, and Maribel got a tissue from the box on the windowsill, and I cried. Not just for my mother, but for the way men like Rick and men like Chase were allergic to my grief, unless it could be used to varnish their own image. "Okay," Tasha said gently when I was done. "Now we go to a hotel." "What?" "London House," she said, with the voice you use when you're enumerating groceries. "We don't need them to give us a folio. That's a long shot. But we can ask nice. We can leave a card. And we can sit at the lobby bar and watch." We went. The lobby was all marble and gold and the kind of lighting that makes you feel like a more expensive version of yourself. The doorman tipped his hat as if we weren't 2 tired college girls with grief in our pockets. We sat at the bar and ordered club soda with lime because I needed bubbles, but not decisions. Tasha, who could be a spy if the law thing fell through, watched the elevator bank with the patience of a cat watching a mouse hole. At 9:40, a woman came off the elevator wearing a blazer and sneakers, red hair and a slick, low ponytail. She looked like a person who'd learned how to make herself fun at work. Her eyes skimmed the room like she was used to rooms being hers. She slid into a banquette, and a man joined her, putting a hand on the small of her back. His hand wore my bracelet. The world narrowed down until it was a tunnel from me to that hand. The leather, the worn place where his keys had rubbed. Chase's easy, flirt-ready smile on his face like a uniform. "Not here," Tasha murmured, fingers pressing my forearm, a pressure point that kept me in my chair. "We are not wrecking your dignity for free in a public lobby." I swallowed my body's scream and watched them touch knees as if they were entitled to each other. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. I didn't zoom because that would ruin the resolution. I leaned back, pretended to take a selfie with Tasha, and caught them in the edge of the frame, the bracelet, the woman's fingers brushing it. The ping of the photo capturing felt like yes. Tasha, watching with her peripheral vision, narrated softly like a baseball radio announcer. "They're going to the elevators. He pressed 8. If we can get close enough to see the room number on the hallway camera in a reflection, I'll die happy." "We're not following," I said. "Not tonight." We sat there breathing, my heart being a percussion ensemble. It took everything I had to stand up and walk out past the concierge like we were tourists who liked marble. In the cold on Michigan Avenue, we exhaled steam that looked like ghosts. "Now," Tasha said, as we stood at the river and watched the ice chunk along, "we hit him in the places he cares about: social capital, career, access." "What do you mean, hit him?" The word tasted like copper. "Legally," she said. "When you're done crying, I'd like to introduce you to the joy of HR." In the days that followed, grief and strategy braided themselves into a rope I could hold. We met with the probate judge. Tasha laid out Rick's missteps like jewels in velvet. The judge was a woman with a crown of gray hair and a quiet voice that made everyone lean forward to listen. She granted a temporary order that required Rick to refrain from contacting clients and required me to provide a plan for continuity. Rick's face did a little twitch. He was polite to the judge and glowered at me in the hallway like I was a traitor to my blood. I spent nights building the plan. At the garage at Northwestern, the student startup incubator tucked into a lot across from tech, the whiteboards were full of ideas that thought they could be companies. I took a corner table and drew a flowchart in black marker: current clients, crew assignments, supplies. I mapped routes between Rogers Park and Evanston and Skokie that made sense. I added online scheduling in a box and circled it. I researched software and settled on something that talked to QuickBooks and Google Calendar and didn't cost a kidney. I wrote to clients, "We are continuing operations. Thank you for your patience during this transition." Maribel co-signed. I emailed staff. "Raises are coming as soon as we stabilize. My mother loved you. I do too." I worked like a person possessed because I was. Possessed by the idea that I could keep something of my mother alive that wasn't just a bundle of letters. Between writing routes and visiting the laundry to buy more microfiber cloths, I built a folder called North Star on my Google Drive. Inside it, I put the screenshot of the boomerang, the photo from the lobby, the Venmo screenshot, a PDF of Harrier Capital's Code of Conduct that Tasha found online with words like client interaction and use of company resources, and a copy of the Northwestern Student Handbooks section on academic integrity that included a subsection on unauthorized collaboration. Chase had borrowed my Python code for his econometrics project in the fall. I'd let him the way you let a boyfriend borrow a sweater, unthinking, because love makes you stupid. But he'd turned it in as his own, never adding my name, and then shrugged when I asked, "It's just code, babe." I had the GitHub commit history. I had Slack messages where he said, "Can you help me with the regression? My brain's fried." I had my mother's voice. "Keep your receipts." We didn't go nuclear immediately. We built a launch sequence. Tasha drafted a letter to Harrier HR with bullet points and evidence attachments. She drafted an anonymous submission to the Northwestern Office of Community Standards about the code. No rage, just facts. We rented a storage unit because grief comes with boxes and vengeance comes with backups. We collected. Chase knocked on my door twice the week after the funeral. The first time, I didn't answer. The second time, Tasha did, because I was in the shower making bargains with the tile. I could hear Tasha's voice steady and low. I could hear Chase's grow sharper, like a cut. When I came out in a towel, the conversation was over, and there was a note under my door. "I messed up, but I love you. Please don't blow up my life." He had underlined love and life the way you underline in a margin, so your eye finds it later. 2 days later, a Harrier Capital recruiting event came to the Alice in the West Loop, the kind where bright-eyed undergrads get to stand near fancy cheese while men in good suits talk about hustle. Chase posted a story of his suit jacket sleeve and a drink and tagged a Harrier cap because some men need to be seen. Tasha, who had a friend in Harrier HR, sent the complaint package to a real email address, not a form black hole. The subject line read, "Use of corporate funds for personal relationship and conflict of interest." The email contained words like London House, Venmo, and a screenshot of the Harrier corporate card ending in 4927 that appeared, faded, and at the bottom of the London House bar receipt I'd retrieved from the trash at my apartment because Chase had left it there like a breadcrumb. The receipt had a timestamp that matched the Venmo and a tip that couldn't be anyone but him. He always tipped 18% because he thought 20% was gauche and 15% was rude. We filed the academic complaint 2 days after that. I attached the GitHub logs and the Slack messages and wrote a paragraph about grief and trust and how theft can wear a boyfriend's face. I didn't put his name in my mouth. The file did it for me. Then I went to court to sit in a hallway, chewing the inside of my cheek while the judge told my uncle that he was to return all keys, cease all client contact, and account for the consulting transfers. Rick nodded the way men nod when they are pretending they are not angry. In the hallway, he leaned close and said, so only I could hear, "You're making an enemy?" I looked him in the eyes and saw a man who had built his life on the assumption that women like my mother and me would always be grateful for his help. "You did that a long time ago," I said. He filed a motion the next day accusing me of emotional instability and inadequate business experience. Tasha read it and rolled her eyes so hard they almost fell out. Classic. He'll bring up the funeral, the tears. "He mocked my tears," I said, "in the pew." "Then you'll laugh in the boardroom," she said. Eventually came faster than I expected. The morning after the Harrier email, I was in Bright Nest's office labeling spray bottles when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't know. "This is Nadia from Harrier Capital HR. Do you have time to speak today?" My pulse shot into my throat. I replied, "Yes." We set a call for 2. I stared at the clock until it was 2, then stared at it 5 more minutes because that felt like power. Nadia's voice was smooth and tired. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," she said. "I didn't do it for you," I said, before I could help it. "Yes," she said, and I could hear her not flinch. "But we still appreciate it. The use of corporate resources for personal activities is a serious matter. We'll be investigating and would appreciate any additional documentation you're comfortable providing." I provided. I sent the receipt, the Venmo, the boomerang screenshot with the bracelet. I didn't embellish. Tasha always said the power of a story like this is in its economy, the perfect line, not the speech. A week later, Chase called me 11 times. I was with Maribel balancing the books when I finally answered. "What did you do?" he demanded. He had lost the performative patience and gone straight to the part of him that was a boy denied a toy. "You emailed my job?" "I sent the truth to someone whose job it is to mind the truth," I said. "Did they take your corporate card away?" "They suspended my offer," he said. Like the word suspended was a hurricane you didn't keep going through if you just said it with enough suffering. Pending investigation. Nadia pulled me into a room and asked me about the London House charge and my relationship with a colleague. This is insane. You're vindictive." "I'm thorough," I said, "and we're done." He laughed once, short and sharp. "You think this makes you some fearless heroine? You ruined my life because I made a mistake." "You made several," I said, "and they were choices." "You're grieving," he sneered. "You're, unwell. Everyone knows it. Rick told me you had some kind of breakdown at the funeral." Blood pounded in my ears so loud it felt like the room pulsed. "He told you that?" "We're friends, Ava. You and my uncle are friends." I let the thought calcify. "Of course you are." He hung up with a curse word he'd only ever used at the TV before. I stared at the phone, and then, slowly, I smiled. My revenge had found 2 birds with 1 stone. 2 days later, The Northwestern Office of Community Standards sent me an email. "We have received your report. Please do not discuss the matter." I didn't discuss it. I wore my mother's sweater and did the payroll and took calls from clients and tried not to scream when I saw Chase's laugh on someone's story because he was still in the world, acting like he hadn't cracked mine. The hearing for the academic thing happened behind doors I wasn't allowed to go through because confidentiality protects the men who cheat. But I found out how it went. Because the world is small and girls talk, Chase was found responsible for plagiarism and unauthorized collaboration. He got a semester probation, a mark on his internal file, and had to write an essay about academic ethics. He texted me, "Satisfied?" I didn't reply. It wasn't about my satisfaction, it was about the ledger. Harrier rescinded his full-time offer. He told everyone it was for budgetary reasons. Everyone who needed to know knew better. Meanwhile, in the quieter war, my company, my mother's now mine, lived. It didn't just live, it metabolized my grief into motion. I hired 2 people. One, a man who'd been laid off from janitorial at the Art Institute, and the other, Maria's cousin who'd cleaned flats in Rogers Park forever and moved like someone had taught her to see invisible dirt. I bumped wages. I made the uniforms optional because my mother hated making women put on shirts that didn't fit. I took over a condo building on Ridge where the board president sent passive-aggressive emails about dust on crown molding. I responded with a checklist and a photo log. I sent holiday cards with a picture of my mother leaning out the van window laughing, and clients sent donation receipts to the hospice in her name. Rick lost. Not right away, because men like Rick are made of Teflon sprayed with money. But the judge limited him. Then the forensic accounting found enough irregularities to remove him from any financial control. He had to pay back $14,700 in consulting fees and $2,900 in charges for golf outings that had somehow ended up on a Bright Nest card. The day he wrote the check, he put it on my desk like a dare and said, "You like this? Taking down family?" "I like not being stolen from," I said, "by anyone." He walked out with his shoulders rounded in a way that made him look his age for the first time. Months later, I'd learned he'd been asked to resign from Windward Realty after a review of his client accounting practices. He had told everyone it was a mutual decision. Everyone who needed to know knew better. I didn't hear from Chase again until July. Bright Nest had taken a contract with a grill and bar chain in the suburbs that had dirt that could walk itself. And I was at Home Depot buying contractor-grade trash bags and magic erasers like I was arming an army. In the paint aisle, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "Ava, it's Natalie." The name hit like a soft bat. "What do you want?" "I want to apologize," she said, and for a moment the world surprised me. "I didn't know about your mother. I mean, I knew I saw something on Instagram, but I didn't put it together that the funeral was that day. He told me you were on a break. He told me a lot of things. I was stupid." I stood by a stack of 5-gallon buckets and watched a man compare shades of grage like his life depended on it. He wore the bracelet I gave him while he was with you. There was a small sound on her end. I didn't know that either. He told me it was his dad's. A pause. For what it's worth, I told HR the truth when they asked. He used his corporate card. He lied in a way that suggested a habit. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, as gently as I could, because my mother taught me that not everyone who hurts you is a villain. Sometimes they're just a mess. "Because I left Harrier," she said, and sighed like a tire losing air. "I hated the culture. I'm at a different shop now. And because I know you run a company, if you ever need an intro to someone, maybe we can be the kind of people who help each other instead of—" She trailed off. "Instead of being footnotes in some guy's story," I said. Yeah. "Okay," I said, after a beat in which I felt my mother nudge me in the ribs. "Thank you." Later that summer, a thing happened that felt like a movie if a movie had 17 minutes of paperwork for every minute of plot. Bright Nest got a big contract. A tech startup in River North wanted nightly cleaning and morning checks because their Series B meant investors now expected them to pretend to care about dust. They were moving into a floor in the merchandise mart, which meant access badges and a security protocol and one of those kitchens with cereal dispensers that made you feel like a toddler with a trust fund. They chose us because Maria had once cleaned for the founder's aunt, and because my Google sheet looked like something you could land a plane on. It meant steady money. It meant buying a second van. The first night we cleaned the space, I stood in the kitchen and wiped fingerprints from a chrome fridge and felt my mother's hand at my elbow in that way of hers, as if to say, "Good. Now, more." Chase found me anyway, like a bad penny under a couch cushion. He texted me a photo in August, his hand holding a beer at Wrigley, a slant of stadium lights. The bracelet was gone. He wrote, "I think of you sometimes." I stared at the text until the words were just shapes. Then I blocked the number. I had a refrigerator to clean. In October, a year since the funeral, the startup we'd landed asked if we could staff an overnight deep clean after their Halloween party. We said yes, because in service businesses, you always say yes unless the person is asking for your firstborn. We cleaned orange frosting out of grout and glitter from wherever glitter goes when it's not being used to hide sadness. I was on my knees under a standing desk when the founder poked his head in. "Hey, you Ava?" he asked. "We're adding a floor. You want a bid?" I nodded with my whole spine. We won the floor because our bid was clean and because Maria somehow got the smell of spilled IPA out of carpet, which should be a Nobel category. I bought the second van the week after Thanksgiving, a used Ford Transit with 60,000 miles and a dent in the back quarter panel that looked like someone had thrown a tantrum. I put our magnet on the side like a flag. On the drive back up Ashland from the lot, I cried. Not the cracked kind of crying from the funeral. This was the full-bodied sob that feels like release when the car is moving and you are more alive than your plans. Rick showed up at my office 2 days later. He had lost weight and grown an expensive beard, the kind men grow when they are trying on dignity. "Congratulations," he said, leaning in the doorway. "Your little mop brigade got a second van." I looked up from my laptop and waited for the other shoe. It didn't take long. "I need work," he said flatly. Windward scapegoated me. "I have applications out. Until then, Elena would have hired me." I almost said, "No!" I almost said something wet and sharp. Instead, I thought about the code Tasha had written into my bones. Lawful, nonviolent, devastating. And another one, mercy isn't weakness if the rules are yours. "What are you good at?" "That doesn't involve touching money," I asked. He blinked. "Relationships." I thought of clients who wanted to be charmed. "We need a dispatcher," I said slowly. "Someone to manage routes, answer phones, coordinate the 5 a.m. freakouts when a building's elevator is broken. It's $23 an hour to start. Benefits after 3 months. The job is not glamorous. The job starts at 4:30 a.m. Sometimes there's vomit." He looked like I'd offered him a mop and a crown and asked him to choose. "I can do that," he said eventually, like he was deciding to be humble as a performance. "You'll train with Maria," I said, not a question, "and you'll sign a clause that says you don't touch accounts." He nodded. "When do I start?" "Monday," I said. "And Rick?" He looked at me like he was still the uncle who gave me $20 at my quinceañera. I held his gaze. "If you mock someone's tears again, you'll find out how cold it gets in January at 4 a.m. when the vans don't start and the only thing between you and losing clients is the person you mocked. You work for me now." He nodded, the kind of nod men give when they are pretending they're not swallowing something that tastes like penance. "Understood." The Monday he began, he wore a collared shirt like he was going to sell you a mortgage. Maria handed him a headset and a page of extension codes and a list of our crew's names and who they liked working with. Don't mess up Maria's schedule, I said. It's the Bible around here. He nodded dutifully. I watched him answer the first call. He said, Bright Nest, this is Rick. How can I help you? And I remembered the way his voice sounded in the church. Try not to make a scene. The headset suited him better. He was good, I'll give him that. People liked talking to him at 6 a.m. when the world was still fuzzy. He learned the routes and the personalities, who needed a pep talk and who needed a list. He showed up on time and didn't sneak the credit. And when the check arrived in the mail from the Merchandise Mart startup in January, he brought it to my desk like it was a sacrament and put it down with both hands. For deposit, he said, and didn't touch it once it was in my space. In March, Harrier Capital hosted a charity gala at the Field Museum. Tasha got us tickets because she is a squirrel who collects favors all her life and spends them like a baller at the right time. They named the event Stories in Starlight, she said, rolling her eyes. We're going to donate $300 from Bright Nest to the teen coding program they're pretending to support, and we're going to watch men in tuxedos network between dinosaurs. Do you think Chase will be there? I asked, a whisper that surprised me. I think he's allergic to places where his star is dimmed, she said dryly. But yes. We went. I wore a navy dress I bought at Nordstrom Rack with a gift card my aunt sent because grief makes people generous in awkward, beautiful ways. The Field Museum at night looks like someplace a goddess would host a sleepover. We drank seltzer and listened to speeches about the future is diverse, delivered by men who had hired their cousins the week before. And then, at the edge of the T-Rex's rib cage, I saw him, Chase, in a tux that fit the way money knows the human body. He had a woman on his arm I didn't recognize, and a smile that tried too hard. He saw me and the smile did a little hiccup. He angled toward us because some men can't resist a stage even when they're in the audience. Ava, he said, and there it was, his performative fondness. You look great. I do, I said, because why should men be the only ones allowed to own that sentence? How's Harrier? Oh, wait. He flinched so perfectly, I had to admire the drama of it. I'm at Carter and North now, he said. Better fit. Tasha's mouth quirked. They know about your code habits? He laughed, the laugh he uses to brush dust off a jacket. You're still bitter. I'm still thorough, I said. Are you enjoying Stories in Starlight? Networking, he said, and glanced at my bracelet. I had the leather band on again, the silver nick catching the gala lights. His eyes stuck to it for a second, like a tongue to cold metal. Nice bracelet. Thanks, I said, and angled my wrist so the engraving caught his eye. North Star. His mouth tightened. He muttered something about needing a drink and drifted like a little boat cut loose from its mooring. On stage, somebody with a headset counted down to a surprise, a slideshow of Harrier Cares moments, volunteering at shelters, mentoring kids, that sort of corporate soul laundering. The slides clicked, volunteers in T-shirts, smiling with their whole teeth. And then, there, a photo of the London House rooftop from last summer, champagne flutes out, captioned, Celebrating Series Wins. The photo had been posted from a public account, and at the bottom corner, half in shadow, a hand wearing a leather bracelet. Someone had selected it without knowing. Someone had put my evidence on a museum wall. I felt Tasha's elbow in my ribs. You could, she breathed, if you wanted to. I could have walked up to the mic during the open giving part and told the story in one breath, concise and cruel. I could have pointed at the photo and said, see, that's the cost of your culture, a woman crying in a bathroom while you toast. I could have burned his name into the marble. But I thought about my mother and my bones, and about what I wanted. I didn't want to be the girl who ruined a gala. I wanted to be the woman whose company Harrier hired when they needed their soul laundered for real. So I didn't. I sipped seltzer and wrote a note on my phone. Follow up with Nadia. Offer a corporate training on conflict of interest for their interns. Call it Receipts. Tasha saw me typing and smiled like someone who'd brought marshmallows to a controlled burn. By May, Bright Nest had 3 vans and a waiting list on Friday nights. We cleaned 2 startup floors and a nonprofit and a dentist who had an emotional support labradoodle. Rick worked dispatch and rolled his eyes at the labradoodle requests, and I pretended not to see him hush his own pride. Sometimes I caught him looking at my mother's photo on the wall, her leaning out of the van laughing, and something in his face would go soft. He never apologized for the pew. He did stop calling me kiddo. One hot Tuesday, we were late for a downtown job because a truck had spilled milk on Lakeshore Drive in a perfect metaphor. I was in the van, sweating, when my phone lit up with a FaceTime from an unknown email. I swiped, because sometimes unknown emails are clients with broken air conditioning, and sometimes they are people who used to own your heart. The face that filled the screen was Natalie's. "We're about to have an all-hands at Carthage Ventures," she said without preamble. "Topic, culture and ethics. We want someone not us to talk for 15 minutes about how to keep receipts. Interested?" I looked at Maria in the passenger seat and Rick in the photo on the dashboard and the city in the windshield and laughed. "I am." The day I gave the talk, I wore the navy dress again because it had become armor. The room was full of faces that had never scrubbed a floor and hands that tapped notes on laptops that cost more than a van. I put up a slide with a photo of a mop and a keyring. "My mother taught me that whoever holds the keys should be the most trustworthy person," I said. "That's true at a cleaning company and at a venture firm." I didn't say Chase's name. I described behaviors. I described systems. I described why it matters to be the kind of person your mother would hand the keys to. When I finished, people clapped like they clap when they think they've seen something pure for a minute inside their own structure. On the way out, near the elevator, I saw him, Chase, carrying a laptop with a sticker that said, "Hustle harder," like a threat. He had a badge that identified him as a consultant, lower on the food chain than he used to be. His eyes slid to my bracelet. "You win," he said. "This wasn't a game," I said. He looked at the floor, and then at the ceiling, and then at me, the way people look when they're trying to figure out what words cost the least. "I'm sorry," he said finally, as if the syllables were something stuck in his throat. "Your mom deserved—" He stopped, because he had used up his actual sorry and started borrowing cliches. "Take care, Ava." I nodded. I didn't forgive him because forgiveness would have given him a role in my story, and he didn't have one anymore. He got on an elevator. I took the stairs. When the contract with Carthage Ventures came through 2 weeks later for ongoing facility services, Rick walked into my office holding the envelope like it was tender. "We've done good," he said, stumbling on the grammar the way men do when the we isn't centered on him. "We have," I said. He stood awkwardly for a second, then said to the open air, "I was a bastard." He stared at the floor like he hadn't planned to say it out loud, at the church. "You were," I said, and didn't fill the silence because I've learned that sometimes the silence is where real things grow. He swallowed. "Your mom would have told me to sit down and shut up." "She would have," I said, and let the flicker of a smile show, because mercy is also part of the ledger. He nodded like a man receiving communion. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "do you want me to take the van in for inspection? The serpentine belt is squealing." I laughed so hard something shook loose inside me. "Yes," I said, "please." He left, and I sat with my mother's photo and the ledger in my bones. The bracelet on my wrist was warm from my skin. In the office, the whiteboard held roots, and the phrase Tasha had written in block letters the day I said I was keeping the company: "Choose yourself." Later that summer, we did a job at the London House because life has a flair for full circles. It was a Sunday morning after a Saturday wedding, and the hallway outside Suite 827 smelled like rose petals and bleach. Maria placed a key card in my palm. The manager had given us access to do a deep shampoo on the carpets after a spilled bottle of red wine, and I slid the card through and walked into a room that looked like a dream. A hotel sells you about being rich. The windows held the river like a ribbon. The table held an abandoned program from a wedding with the couple's names in gold. The carpet held the memory of wine. I stood there and watched the city I loved move around me and thought about the girl I had been in a church pew with a text and a hand on her shoulder. I thought about the woman I was at 24 who ran a company that paid 32 people a living wage and had clients who made the city possible. I thought about Rick and his headset and Chase in a job with fewer vowels and more effort, and I felt a thing I hadn't let myself feel: peace. We finished the room. We took the trash downstairs. We drove the van up Lakeshore Drive with the windows down and the radio on, and the skyline like a promise out the windshield. At a red light, a bike messenger tapped on our window and said, "Hey, I see your vans everywhere. You guys are killing it." Maria beamed and said, "We try." I rolled the bracelet on my wrist so the engraving was against my skin. I pulled up to the office, grabbed my laptop, and went inside to do payroll, because there is always payroll, and because building your own life is a ritual like any other. The headset on Rick's desk hung like a small black halo. The whiteboard had a smudge where someone had erased vomit. On my desk, next to the stapler, was a Post-it written in my mother's hand that I had framed in a cheap frame: "Be brave, not hard." So I was brave, and not hard, and not soft either. A texture like rope you can hold when the wind comes. When people ask me how I planned it, how I made them pay without breaking myself, I tell them what my mother told me. Keep your receipts, keep your dignity, and keep moving. Grief will come along either way. The trick is to give it a job. In the fall, we added health insurance. In the winter, we added 2 days bereavement, because why should only office jobs get to cry and not get fired? In the spring, we cleaned a daycare where toddlers left handprints like galaxies on the glass. I stood there for a minute, my gloved hand hovering, and thought of my mother's laugh. I thought of Tasha's steady voice in court, and Natalie's call in Home Depot, and Rick's apology, and Chase's useless sorry. And I felt a new thing in my chest where the raw had been. The cool, exacting satisfaction of a ledger balanced. Sometimes, in the blue hour before dawn, I drive one of the vans to our first job. The city belongs to people like me at that hour, the ones who make it possible for morning to look like magic to everyone else. I park, click off the engine, and sit with my hands on the wheel while the heater hums. The bracelet rests on my wrist, warm. I think of the church and the text and the whisper in my ear that told me to be smaller. And I put my hand on the door handle and open it. And I go make the world a little cleaner. Behind me, in the office, my uncle answers the phone and says, "Bright Nest, this is Rick. How can I help?" Because now he works for my company. And in the mirror, with the streetlights dimming, I see a woman my mother would give the keys to. The end.